I gave my parents a new home, but my brothers-in-laws moved in. One sentence made them leave instantly. The day I handed my parents the keys to their dream home was the culmination of a promise I'd made to myself at 16. Back then, I'd watched my father fall asleep at our dinner table after working 3 consecutive shifts at the factory. His calloused hands, once steady enough to craft intricate wooden chess pieces, trembled even in sleep. Beside him, my mother silently gathered the bills scattered across the table, her eyes calculating which ones could wait another month. One day, I whispered to myself, they'll never worry about money again. 15 years later, I stood in front of a modest lakeside cottage with a red ribbon tied to the mailbox. My parents pulled their 20-year-old sedan into the gravel driveway, confusion evident in their expressions. "Sana, why did you ask us to meet you here?" My mother, Nadia, adjusted her headscarf as she stepped out of the car. At 58, her once jet black hair had silvered at the temples, but her eyes remained as sharp as ever. "Did someone from your office move in here?" My father, Ibrahim, asked, his English still carrying the melodic accent of our homeland despite 3 decades in America. I couldn't contain my smile as I pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket. "Not someone from my office, Baba." I handed him the envelope. "You." They stared at me blankly. "Open it," I urged, my heart pounding with anticipation. With trembling fingers, my father opened the envelope and removed the deed. I watched his eyes widen as he scanned the document, then looked up at me in disbelief. "This is..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Your home," I completed. "Both of yours. No more apartment stairs for your knees, Baba. No more noisy neighbors keeping you awake, Mama." My mother took the papers from him, her hands shaking. "This cannot be real. We cannot accept." "It's already done," I said, pulling a single brass key from my pocket. "And it's nothing compared to what you've given me." I placed the key in my mother's palm and closed her fingers around it. For a moment, we all stood in silence. Then, to my surprise, my father, a man who had remained stoic through war, immigration, and decades of backbreaking work, began to weep. "After everything," he whispered, "our daughter still had to save us." "No, Baba." I embraced him. "You saved me first. This is just me saying thank you." For the next week, I helped them settle in. We unpacked boxes filled with memories, photo albums, handmade quilts, the chess set my father had finally found time to complete. We arranged furniture, hung curtains, and planted the beginnings of my mother's herb garden. Each evening, they sat on the porch swing I'd installed, watching the sun set over the lake. "I never thought I would have this," my mother confessed one evening as we shared tea. "In the old country, only the wealthy lived near water. Now you're the wealthy ones," I teased, though we all knew my parents lived modestly on their pensions and my father's Social Security. My brother Aaron called once during that week. "The place looks nice from the photos," he said, his voice distant. Though only 2 years my junior, Aaron had always felt like he belonged to a different generation. While I had followed our parents' path of diligence and sacrifice, Aaron had embraced American individualism with both arms. "You should visit," I suggested. "Bring Mira and the kids." "Maybe when things settle down at work," he replied, the same answer he'd given for the past 3 years. I didn't press him. Family dynamics had grown complicated since Aaron married Mira, whose parents, Martha and Gerald Thompson, had never quite warmed to our foreign ways, as Martha delicately put it during rare family gatherings. Everything changed on the 8th day. I arrived with groceries to find an unfamiliar silver SUV parked in the driveway. Inside the house, suitcases lined the hallway, and the scent of unfamiliar perfume hung in the air. "Mom?"
"Dad,"
I called, setting the bags on the counter. My mother emerged from the guest bedroom, her expression unreadable. Behind her stood Martha Thompson, dressed in crisp linen pants and a pastel blouse that probably cost more than my father's monthly pension. "Sana." Martha's smile didn't reach her eyes. What a lovely surprise. Before I could respond, Gerald appeared from the bathroom, followed by my father, who looked inexplicably apologetic. What's going on? I asked, looking between them all. Your brother called us, Martha explained, placing a manicured hand on my father's shoulder. He was worried about your parents managing this big new house all alone. We're just here to help out for a little while. My father avoided my gaze. My mother twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years. That's thoughtful, I managed, though something cold settled in my stomach. How long will you be staying? Oh, just until they're properly settled, Gerald said vaguely, already rearranging the spice jars my mother had organized the day before. A week or two, perhaps. A week or two? I echoed, looking to my parents for confirmation. My mother gave a small nod. They insisted, she whispered when Martha turned away. We couldn't say no. They're Aaron's family, too. I wanted to object, to remind them this was their home to do with as they pleased. But the pleading look in my mother's eyes stopped me. After a lifetime of avoiding conflict, I knew asking them to confront Martha and Gerald would only cause them distress. I'll come by tomorrow, I promised instead. As I walked to my car, a text from Aaron appeared on my phone. Thanks for the house. Mom and Dad need real help though. Martha and Gerald have experience with elderly care. Elderly care? Our parents were in their late 50s, still active and sharp-minded. I started to type an angry response, then deleted it. Getting into an argument with Aaron wouldn't solve anything. I glanced back at the house, at the dream home I'd sacrificed and saved for years to provide. Through the window, I could see Martha rearranging the family photos on the mantel, placing them in neat, symmetrical rows that my mother would never have chosen. I thought they were being kind, but kindness doesn't change the locks when you're not looking. 3 days passed before I could return to my parents' home. A crisis at the hospital where I worked as a pediatric surgeon had kept me on my feet for 36 hours straight. By the time I pulled into their driveway, exhaustion blurred the edges of my vision, but concern for my parents pushed aside my fatigue. The moment I entered, I knew something had changed. The scent of my mother's cardamom tea was gone, replaced by the artificial freshness of commercial air fresheners. The hand-woven rug from my grandmother, a wedding gift my parents had carried across oceans, was missing from the entryway. Mom, I called out, stepping further inside. Dad. Martha appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a pristine white apron. Oh, Sana, we weren't expecting you. Your parents are resting. Resting? It's 2 p.m. Elderly folks need routine, Martha explained with practiced patience. We've implemented a daily schedule to help them adjust. Before I could respond, my mother emerged from the bedroom, her face lighting up when she saw me. Sana, you're here. She moved to embrace me, but paused as Martha cleared her throat. Nadia, remember what we discussed about exerting yourself, Martha said gently, though her eyes remained cool. My mother's arms fell to her sides. Yes, of course. I looked between them, noticing how my mother's usual confident posture had diminished. She seemed smaller somehow, her shoulders curving inward. What's going on? I asked, gesturing around the changed living room. Where's grandmother's rug? And what happened to the furniture arrangement? Gerald emerged from my father's study, carrying a toolbox. We've been making some improvements, he announced. This place was a safety hazard. That old rug was a tripping hazard. The furniture blocked easy pathways. And don't get me started on the kitchen. All those spices unlabeled, medications stored improperly. Medications. I frowned. Dad only takes a blood pressure pill once a day. He's been managing it for years. And missing doses, Martha chimed in. We've organized everything in a system now. She led me to the kitchen where a large plastic container held compartmentalized pill boxes, each labeled with times and days. It looked like something from a nursing home, not a family kitchen. A key hung around Martha's neck. I pointed to it. What's that for? Just a precaution, she said smoothly. Your father tried to take his medication twice yesterday. We've secured all potentially dangerous items. My father appeared in the doorway, his expression uncharacteristically subdued. Sana, he said, his voice lacking its usual strength. You should have called ahead. I didn't know I needed an appointment to see my own parents, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Martha stepped between us. We're establishing healthy boundaries, she explained. Unexpected visitors can disrupt the routine. I'm not a visitor. I'm their daughter. Of course you are, dear. Martha patted my arm condescendingly. But structure is important at their age. I looked past her to my father. Dad, is this what you want? These changes? Before he could answer, Gerald's hand clamped firmly on his shoulder. Ibrahim is grateful for the help. Aren't you, Ibrahim? My father's eyes met mine briefly, then dropped to the floor. They're just trying to help, Sanaa. That evening, I sat with my mother in the garden while Martha and Gerald prepared dinner. The herb seedlings we'd planted together had been removed, replaced by ornamental flowers that my mother would never have chosen. Mom, I whispered, are you okay with all this? The changes, the rules? This is your home. She glanced nervously toward the kitchen window. Martha says it's safer this way, more organized. But what do you want? My mother's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her headscarf. She hesitated, then sighed. Aaron says we should be grateful. Your father and we don't want to cause problems. At dinner, I watched in growing disbelief as Martha corrected my mother's table setting, rearranging the silverware my mother had placed. When my father reached for the salt, Gerald stopped his hand. Sodium restriction, remember? We talked about this. My father withdrew his hand like a scolded child. Later, as my mother prepared her evening tea, a ritual she'd performed thousands of times, Martha intervened. That's too much cardamom, she said, taking the spoon from my mother's hand. And you should use less sugar. Bad for blood pressure. I saw the way my mother flinched when her tea was corrected by that woman. It wasn't help. It was control. As I prepared to leave, I found my father sitting alone on the porch, staring at the lake with vacant eyes. Dad, I said softly, speak to me honestly. Are you happy with this arrangement? For a moment, a flash of the professor he once was returned to his eyes. Your intentions were good, Sanaa, but perhaps we are too old for change. You're only 59, Dad. You taught university classes until last year. Martha says cognitive decline begins earlier in people from backgrounds like ours. The casual racism stunned me into silence. Before I could recover, Martha appeared at the door. Ibrahim, it's medication time, she announced. Sanaa was just leaving, weren't you? As I drove away, I called Aaron. What's happening at the house? I demanded when he answered. Mom and Dad are being treated like children. They need structure, he replied defensively. And Martha and Gerald know what they're doing. They managed Gerald's parents' care for years. Until they died in a nursing home. I shot back. That's unfair. They're helping Sanaa. Maybe if you weren't so controlling yourself, you'd see that. The call ended with angry words on both sides. Something had changed in my brother, something I couldn't quite identify. The distance in his voice wasn't just emotional. It was as if he was reading from a script someone else had written. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the image of my father's defeated posture and my mother's nervous glances. For the first time, I wondered if my gift had become a burden. The freedom I'd sought to give my parents was vanishing before my eyes, replaced by a gilded cage with Martha and Gerald holding the keys. A week later, I pulled into my parents' driveway with a carload of groceries and my mother's favorite dessert, baklava from the Lebanese bakery across town. The moment I stepped out of my car, Gerald appeared on the porch, arms crossed. Sanaa, he said with exaggerated patience. We've talked about this. Visits need to be scheduled. I held up the grocery bags. I brought supplies. And Mom's favorite. We've already done the shopping for the week. Their nutritional needs are carefully planned. I stared at him. They're not inmates, Gerald. They're my parents. He sighed heavily. We'll be finishing lunch soon. Perhaps you could come back this evening? Around 6? For exactly 1 hour? The dismissal was so blatant I nearly dropped the bags. I want to see my parents. Now. Gerald stepped closer, lowering his voice. Your mother finds your visits upsetting. You question our methods, which confuses them. They were just starting to adapt to the routine. Let me hear that from her, I challenged. Before Gerald could respond, Martha appeared at the door. Ibrahim is having one of his episodes, she called out. We need to minimize stimulation. Episodes? What episodes? Alarm coursed through me. My father doesn't have episodes. It started 3 days ago, Martha explained, her voice dripping with artificial concern. Moments of confusion, agitation. The doctor suggested limiting visitors. What doctor? Their primary physician is Dr. Patel. I spoke with him last week. Martha's smile tightened. Dr. Westfield, a specialist in geriatric care. Your brother approved the consultation. My blood went cold. I want to see my father. That would be unwise right now. Perhaps next week, if he stabilizes. As they spoke, I caught a glimpse of my mother through the window. She stood in the kitchen, staring toward us, her hand pressed against the glass. When our eyes met, she quickly turned away. That night, I called my parents' landline repeatedly. No answer. I texted both their cell phones. No response. By morning, I was frantic enough to call Aaron. They've changed the locks, I told him, voice shaking with anger. They're claiming Dad is having episodes that never existed before. They've brought in some doctor we don't know. Dr. Westfield is excellent, Aaron replied calmly. And the episodes are real, Sanaa. Dad tried to leave the house at 3 a.m. last week, confused about where he was. If Martha hadn't caught him, who knows what could have happened. That doesn't sound like Dad. Because you're not there every day. You swoop in with treats and then leave. You're not seeing the daily struggles. His words stung. I would be there more if your in-laws weren't blocking the door. They're establishing boundaries which Mom and Dad need. Look, they've handled this before with Gerald's parents, who died under their care. I interrupted. A painful silence followed. They were already terminal, Aaron finally said, his voice cold. And I won't listen to you slander people who are sacrificing their time to help our parents. Sacrificing. I laughed bitterly. They've moved in permanently, Aaron. I drove by yesterday evening, and they're setting up a satellite dish. They're not planning to leave. Maybe that's for the best, Aaron replied. The house is large enough for everyone. I hung up, my hands shaking. Something was very wrong with this situation, and with my brother. After several more attempts to visit, I found myself sitting in my car across the street, watching the house like a stranger. Through binoculars, I observed Martha escorting my father to an unfamiliar car. He moved slowly, uncertainly, nothing like the confident stride I'd known all my life. That afternoon, I received a formal email from Dr. Jacob Westfield, introducing himself as my parents' new care coordinator and suggesting a family meeting to discuss their progressing conditions. The language was clinical, detached, treating my vigorous 50-something parents like hospice patients. At the bottom of the email was a line that made my stomach drop. All inquiries regarding Ibrahim and Nadia Rashid should be directed through their designated healthcare proxies, Gerald and Martha Thompson. Healthcare proxies? When had that happened? I tried calling Aaron again, but his wife Mira answered instead. He's not available, she said flatly. It's important, Mira. Did you know your parents have somehow become Mom and Dad's healthcare proxies? A pause. Aaron signed the papers last week. It makes sense, Sanaa. They have the experience. Why wasn't I consulted? I'm a doctor, for God's sake. That's exactly why, Mira replied. You're too emotional about this. Too close to the situation. My parents can be objective. After we hung up, I received a text from an unknown number. Sanaa, it's Mom. Using Martha's old phone while she naps. Don't call. Something wrong with Dad. Not himself. They take him somewhere every day. He comes back worse. Your father wanted me to tell you. The silver box. Back of his closet. Important. I love. The message cut off abruptly. When I tried to reply, my messages failed to deliver. That night, I drove back to the house and parked down the street, watching. At 2 a.m., the lights were still on. Through the windows, I could see Gerald and Martha in what had been my father's study, going through his papers. A third person I didn't recognize was with them, a balding man in a suit, signing documents that Martha handed him. I bought them a home, but I realized too late I'd handed them a prison. After 3 sleepless nights, I knew I needed to act strategically rather than emotionally. As a surgeon, I'd learned that panic never saved a patient, methodical action did. I took a week of emergency leave from the hospital and began my investigation. My first stop was Dr. Patel's office. My parents had been his patients for 15 years. This Dr. Westfield, I asked after explaining the situation, have you received any transfer of records? Any consultation requests? Dr. Patel frowned. Nothing. And ethically, I couldn't release records without your parents' consent. He hesitated, then added quietly, I tried calling to check on them last month for their regular follow-up. Someone, a woman, said they had a new physician and wouldn't be returning. But my father's medication. Exactly my concern, Dr. Patel nodded. Ibrahim's blood pressure requires careful monitoring with his specific medication. Changing it without proper transition could be dangerous. Ice formed in my stomach. Can you tell me if this Westfield is even legitimate? Dr. Patel typed something into his computer. There's a Jacob Westfield licensed in this state, but... He paused, looking troubled. He's not a geriatrician. He specializes in psychiatry, with a focus on dementia and competency evaluations. Competency evaluations. The kind used to determine if someone could manage their own affairs. The kind that could lead to conservatorship. My next stop was the county records office. The clerk was initially hesitant to help, but when I explained I was the legal property owner checking on my own deed, she relented. No changes to the deed, she confirmed after checking. Property is still solely in your name, Sana Rashid. Relief washed over me. At least they hadn't somehow transferred the house. Has anyone requested copies of the deed recently? I asked on impulse. The clerk checked her computer again. Yes, actually. 2 requests in the past month. She turned the screen toward me. One from a law office, Berger and Associates. And one from Gerald Thompson. That explained the late-night visitor I'd seen. A lawyer. Next, I contacted my college roommate, Layla, now an estate attorney. This doesn't sound like caregiving, she said gravely after I explained everything. It sounds like elder abuse and possibly financial exploitation. Have they isolated your parents from other friends and family too? Changed financial arrangements? I don't know about finances, I admitted. But the isolation is complete. They've changed the locks, screened all calls, claimed medical issues that didn't exist before. Classic signs, Layla confirmed. And this mysterious doctor conducting evaluations? Huge red flag. What's your endgame here, Sana? What do you want? I want my parents safe. I want those people out of their house, my house. Then we need evidence. Bank records, medical documentation, witness statements. And most importantly, we need to determine if your parents are being medicated beyond their prescribed treatments. A cold realization struck me. The text from my mother mentioned Dad not being himself and coming back worse after daily outings. Could they be drugging him? Deliberately making him appear confused to justify their control? Following Layla's guidance, I contacted their bank. As a joint account holder on one of my father's old accounts, established years ago for emergency purposes, I had limited access to transaction history. What I found was chilling. Regular withdrawals, $5, $000, $7,000, $3,000, all in the past month. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. And most disturbing, a changed beneficiary form listing Martha and Gerald Thompson on my parents' retirement accounts. That's your smoking gun, Layla said when I showed her. But proving they used undue influence is complicated. What about the property? I asked. It's still in my name. Layla's eyes lit up. That's our leverage. They can't legally keep you out of your own property. That evening, I received another brief, frantic text from my mother's borrowed phone. Silver box. Important papers. Marriage license, birth certificates, silver key. Dad hid copies. Martha looking everywhere for them. Now I understood. My cautious, meticulous father had hidden backup documents somewhere in the house, documents that could undermine whatever scheme Martha and Gerald were orchestrating. I needed to get into that house.
But how?
The answer came unexpectedly. A community newsletter arrived in my mailbox announcing the annual Lake Association meeting, a gathering of all homeowners in the lakeside community. The meeting would be held at the community center this Sunday. Martha and Gerald would have to attend to maintain their facade as concerned caregivers. They couldn't risk neighbors becoming suspicious. I formulated my plan carefully. First, I filed a police report documenting my concerns, creating an official record without requesting immediate intervention. Next, I hired a locksmith recommended by Layla, someone discreet and unquestioning. Sunday morning, I watched from a distance as Martha and Gerald left with my mother, dressed for the community gathering. My father, presumably, was too ill to attend. The moment their car disappeared around the bend, I moved. The locksmith met me at the back door, and within minutes, I had new keys to my own property. I entered silently, uncertain if my father might be inside with a caregiver. The house was empty. I moved quickly to my father's closet, pushing aside neatly arranged shirts that he would never have organized that way. At the back, behind a panel loosened by design, I found it, a tarnished silver box with my family's initials engraved on top. Inside lay exactly what my mother had described: duplicate copies of essential documents, a spare key to a safe deposit box I hadn't known existed, and something unexpected, a small digital recorder. My hands trembled as I pressed play. "Sanaa," my father's voice emerged, strong and lucid, nothing like the confused man I'd glimpsed recently. "If you're listening to this, it means things have gone exactly as I feared. I'm leaving this record just in case. Martha and Gerald are not what they seem. They've done this before. We've discovered." The recording cut off abruptly, but my father's message was clear. They forgot one thing. I may have walked away once, but I never leave my parents unprotected. Armed with documents from the silver box and evidence from my investigation, I spent the next 3 days preparing for the confrontation. Layla helped me draft legal notices and contacted Adult Protective Services to open a case. I discovered that Gerald and Martha had a pattern. They'd cared for 3 elderly couples in the past 5 years, each time becoming beneficiaries to substantial assets before the seniors mysteriously declined or died. What I hadn't expected was the text from Aaron on Saturday night. "Family dinner tomorrow at Mom and Dad's. 1 p.m. Need to talk about permanent arrangements." Permanent arrangements. The phrase sent chills down my spine. I arrived at the house at exactly 1 p.m. on Sunday, dressed not in my usual casual clothes but in a tailored suit, my surgeon meets the hospital board outfit that commanded respect. In my leather portfolio were the property deed, financial records, and copies of everything from my father's silver box. The driveway was full of cars, not just Martha and Gerald's, but also Aaron and Myra's, and 2 I didn't recognize.
Good.
Witnesses. I didn't knock. I used my new key. Inside, the table had been set for a formal dinner. Martha was placing a centerpiece of artificial flowers where my mother's fresh-cut garden blooms should have been. Gerald was pouring wine, while a balding man I recognized from my surveillance, the lawyer, sat reviewing documents with Aaron. My mother sat silently beside my father, whose vacant stare heightened my concern. Conversation stopped abruptly when I entered. "Sanaa." Martha's surprise quickly morphed into practiced concern. "We weren't expecting you until later. Your brother mentioned you might join us for dessert." "I decided to come for the main course," I replied calmly, looking directly at my father. "Dad, how are you feeling today?" Before he could answer, Dr. Westfield, whom I recognized from his professional photo online, interjected. "Ibrahim is having one of his better days, but we should avoid exciting him." I placed my portfolio on the table. "Interesting diagnosis, Dr. Westfield, considering my father has no history of cognitive issues and was teaching advanced mathematics until recently." "With all due respect, Dr. Rashid," he replied smoothly, recognizing my professional title, "cognitive decline can accelerate rapidly, especially in certain ethnic populations." The casual racism mirrored Martha's earlier comments. I smiled thinly. I presume you've taken blood samples to rule out medication interactions? Or perhaps checked for unnecessary sedatives in his system? Westfield's eyes narrowed slightly. Gerald stepped forward. Sanaa, this is exactly why we've limited your visits. You upset the delicate balance we've established. What's in the portfolio, Sanaa? My mother's quiet question cut through the tension. Despite her subdued demeanor, her eyes held a spark of the strength I remembered. Evidence, I said simply, opening it to reveal the property deed. Starting with ownership of this house. Martha laughed nervously. We all know your parents own their home now. Actually, no. I slid the deed across the table. The house remains in my name. I delayed the transfer for tax purposes, with my parents' knowledge. The lawyer leaned forward, examining the document with sudden interest. This changes nothing, Gerald declared. The healthcare proxy gives us authority to determine what's best for Ibrahim and Nadia. A proxy obtained under false pretenses, I countered, with a doctor who specializes not in geriatric care but in competency evaluations for conservatorship cases. Convenient. Aaron stood up, face flushed. That's enough, Sanaa. You've never respected their need for care. Care? I cut him off. Is that what you call systematically isolating them, drugging Dad and draining their accounts? Martha gasped dramatically. How dare you suggest? $15,000 withdrawn in the past month. I continued, voice steady. Retirement accounts with changed beneficiaries. Dr. Patel replaced without proper medical transition. Dad's blood pressure medication altered. Should I continue? The room fell silent. My father blinked rapidly, as if fighting through a fog. Sanaa, he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard in weeks. You found the box? Yes, Dad. I found everything. Martha moved toward my father, but I stepped between them. Don't touch him. Gerald's face hardened. I think you should leave, Sanaa. Your brother agrees that our arrangement is working well. I looked at Aaron, whose confident expression had faltered. Did you know they've done this before? 3 times, Aaron. Each time, the patients declined rapidly after Martha and Gerald took over. Mira spoke up, her voice uncertain. Mom, Dad, what is she talking about? Lies, Martha hissed. All lies. I reached into my portfolio and withdrew the final document, a police report detailing a previous investigation into Gerald and Martha Thompson for suspected elder abuse. The case had been dropped when the victim died, but the report remained. I placed it in front of my brother. Read it. As Aaron scanned the document, his face paled. Martha lunged for the paper, but he pulled it away. You said they died of natural causes, he whispered. They did, Gerald insisted. This is all a misunderstanding. I had heard enough. I stood tall, looking each of them in the eye before delivering the sentence I'd rehearsed. If you're not out of my house by midnight, I'll have you removed for trespassing, and trust me, I won't be calling nicely next time. The lawyer cleared his throat. Perhaps we should. You should leave now, I interrupted. Adult Protective Services has been notified. The police have copies of everything I've shown you today. And I've scheduled blood tests for my father tomorrow to screen for unnecessary medications. Martha's composure finally cracked. You ungrateful. We were helping. Like you helped Gerald's parents? And the Hendersons? And the Wilsons? I named the previous victims from my research. My mother stood shakily. I want them gone, Aaron. Now. The authority in her voice, the mother I remembered, broke through whatever hold Martha and Gerald had established. My brother nodded slowly. I think you should go, Martha. Gerald, until we figure this out. This is ridiculous, Gerald sputtered. After everything we've done, pack your things, I said firmly. You have until midnight, not a minute longer. They left within 2 hours, Martha sobbing theatrically while Gerald made threatening calls to connections who never materialized. The lawyer, sensing a losing battle, disappeared first. Dr. Westfield mumbled something about misunderstandings and followed shortly after. My father, already more alert as whatever medications they'd given him began to wear off, watched from the porch as their car disappeared down the driveway. "I knew you'd come," he said simply, squeezing my hand. "I knew you'd find the box." The transformation didn't happen overnight. The day after Martha and Gerald's departure, I took blood samples from my father and sent them to a toxicology lab through a trusted colleague. The results confirmed my suspicions. Traces of sedatives never prescribed by Dr. Patel. Medications that would make a brilliant mathematician appear confused and compliant. "It's a common tactic in elder abuse cases," Detective Rivera explained when I filed formal charges. "Make the victim appear incompetent, then gain control of their assets." But criminal proceedings would take time. My immediate priority was my parents' recovery. I took a month's leave from the hospital, something I hadn't done in 7 years, and moved temporarily into the guest room. The first week was mostly undoing damage, restoring my mother's garden, retrieving family heirlooms from where Martha had hidden them, removing the child-proof locks from cabinets, and replacing the surveillance cameras Gerald had installed with a simpler security system my parents could control. My father improved rapidly once properly medicated. After 10 days, the vacant stare disappeared completely. After 2 weeks, he was correcting the newspaper's daily crossword puzzle. By the 3rd week, he was discussing returning to guest lecturing at the university. My mother's recovery was more complex. The physical constraints had been removed, but the psychological impact lingered. She startled at sudden sounds, asked permission before making tea in her own kitchen, and apologized constantly for imagined inconveniences. "It wasn't just the big things," she confided one evening as we sat on the porch swing. "It was the 1,000 small humiliations. The way Martha would correct my accent. The way Gerald would explain simple concepts as if I couldn't understand English after 30 years in this country. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked gently. She studied her hands. "At first, it happened so gradually. Then, when we realized what was happening, your father worried that Aaron would take their side. We didn't want to force you to choose between us and your brother." Aaron, the most complicated piece of the aftermath. He'd disappeared after that confrontation Sunday, taking Mira and their children to her parents' house. 2 weeks passed before he called. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice strained. "Just us." We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. He looked terrible, shadows under his eyes, clothes rumpled. None of his usual polished appearance. "I didn't know," he said immediately. "About their history, about the medications. I thought they were helping." "You believed them over your own family," I replied, not hiding my anger. "You enabled everything they did." "They're Myra's parents," he said, as if that explained everything. "They've always been controlling, but I never thought they'd..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "They would have taken everything, Aaron. The house, the retirement accounts, everything Mom and Dad worked for." "I know that now." He looked down at his untouched coffee. "Mira and I are in counseling. The way her parents manipulated us, it's shown us some uncomfortable truths about our relationship. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was necessary. By the end, we'd established tentative boundaries for his eventual return to our parents' lives. It would be a long road to rebuild trust, but the foundation was there. Meanwhile, practical matters needed addressing. With Layla's help, I set up proper legal protections for my parents, an ironclad power of attorney that named me as their representative, revocable trust for their assets, and advanced healthcare directives that respected their wishes. Together, we interviewed and selected Mrs. Rivera, a retired nurse who lived 3 doors down, to check in 3 times weekly. She was warm but respectful of their independence, fluent in Arabic, and made a baklava that even my mother admitted rivaled her own. "She doesn't hover," my father approved. "And she beats me at chess occasionally, which is refreshing." The most meaningful change came exactly 1 month after Martha and Gerald's departure. I arrived to find my mother in the garden, hands deep in soil, planting the herbs that had been uprooted. My father sat nearby with his books spread across the patio table, making notes for a guest lecture. "We're thinking of hosting a dinner next Sunday," my mother announced. "Nothing fancy. Just family and a few neighbors." "Are you sure?" I asked carefully. It's not too soon? My father looked up, the sunlight reflecting off his glasses. We can't let fear dictate our lives, Sana. This is our home. We should fill it with people we choose. That Sunday, I watched my parents welcome their guests, neighbors, colleagues, a few of my father's former students. Aaron came briefly, awkward but trying. My mother moved confidently through her kitchen, no longer flinching when reaching for spices. My father told academic jokes that only half the room understood, but everyone laughed at anyway. As twilight fell, we gathered on the porch to watch the sunset over the lake. My father's arm rested around my mother's shoulders, both of them finally at ease in the home I'd given them. You know, my mother said quietly, they came in pretending to care. But real care doesn't come with locks, lies, and fear. Real care comes with love, and love knows when to fight back. I squeezed her hand, finally at peace with my decision to buy this house. It had nearly become a prison, but now it was truly a home, safe, warm, and entirely theirs. The lake reflected the sunset in shimmering orange and gold, a perfect mirror of the light in my parents' reclaimed lives.